So Bernie Sanders had his town hall last night that was hosted by CNN, and he surprised us with a few of his answers. He was a little bit snappy, snappier than usual. Was not going to let someone dictate his narrative, and even surprise many of us on his stance on Venezuela. Now, some people are saying he didn't move far enough left. Some people are basically not even acknowledging what he said. But when CNN freaks out about the answer you gave, then you can rest assured that you may not be 100% right, but you are indeed on the right track. Now, I can't play all the clips, so I'll talk about what was discussed before that. But I do want to play this important part so you all can hear why this is so important.
So my view is that whether it is Saudi Arabia, which is a despotic regime, or whether it is Venezuela, I think we have got to do everything that we can to create a democratic climate. But I do not believe in U.S. military intervention in those countries.
Why have you, Senator, why have you stopped short of calling Maduro of Venezuela a dictator?
Well, I think it's fair to say that the last election was undemocratic, but there are still democratic operations taking place in that country. The point is, what I am calling for right now is internationally supervised free elections. And I do find it interesting that Trump is very concerned about what goes on in Venezuela. But what about the last election that took place in Saudi Arabia? Oh, there wasn't any election in Saudi Arabia. Oh, women are treated as third-class citizens. So I find it interesting that Trump is kind of selective as to where he is concerned about democracy.
So, as you could hear, Bernie Sanders pivoted a bit. Now, I may be, I might be incorrect about this, but I'm pretty sure that was the first time in the last 2 years that we've heard Bernie Sanders absolutely refuse to call Maduro a dictator. Now, that's important for a few reasons, right? Now, the reason why it's important is because, one, it seems like he's listening to us. We've been calling him out on this for a while. I know that Bernie Sanders isn't the most social media savvy. He has a great social media team. Well, sometimes. We have a great social media team. They did great social media grassroots work, but that doesn't mean that 77-year-old Bernie Sanders is on Twitter every day looking at the conversations being had, because it's just not realistic. I just don't, it's different. He's in the moment, in the now, talking to people face to face. He's not necessarily getting his feedback off of Twitter. He has other people for that. Now, there are some disconnects that come with that. Like, for example, where he stands on foreign policy at times can be a little bit disjointed from where his progressive allies stand on foreign policy. But with this statement, it looks like he's moving forward further to the left. Now, with Blitzer, says, well, out of nowhere, weirdly unprompted, because I hadn't even thought about that point until Blitzer brought it up. But that lets you know how much they are craving a regime change war. So Wolf Blitzer says, oh, you stopped short of calling him a dictator. Wait a minute, Wolf, you're telling me out of all the warnings that Bernie is giving you, right? Out of everything that Bernie said, talking about Guatemala, Chile, Brazil, Honduras, talking about Vietnam, Iraq, explaining how almost every single one of those situations had unintended consequences. That should be the warning that everyone was looking for. If you were ever looking for a reason to disbelieve the message being perpetuated by both the Fox Newses of the world and the CNNs of the world, this was it. That statement. Oh, why didn't you call him a dictator? Why? Because you can't overthrow a democratic government. Not legitimately, anyway. You'll get much more pushback So the important part of a regime change war is what? The narrative that you use to justify your regime change. Bernie Sanders, whether he knew it or not, accidentally busted up that narrative when he refused to call Maduro a dictator for the first time. Now, I will say that before that, he said something I didn't necessarily necessarily agree with. You know how I feel. They said that the elections were not free and fair. However, he followed up by saying, now, I am okay with a free and fair election that is monitored by the international community. And you know what? If it doesn't involve the United States, then I think that Maduro will go for that because he was probably clearly the winner, right? Maduro is very popular, and most of his popularity actually comes from standing up to Western imperialism. Not only standing up to Western imperialism, in the international community, but also standing up to the oligarchy right in his home of Venezuela. That's why he's so popular. Now, the question was framed in such a way that they were very specific about U.S. intervention, which brings me to the second point about what I love about Bernie Sanders' answer. He was careful. Obviously, people like myself are a little bit rambunctious at times, but in controlled environments, sometimes you have to be a little bit more controlled because he still got his point across, in my humble opinion. I think that people were getting emotional on both sides because he didn't say exactly what they wanted to hear. But if you're going to be a president, I think his answer was pretty sufficient. Hey, you know what? If there are problems in Venezuela, as far as their economy is concerned, if there are food shortages, I believe the international community should assist with this. Someone, perhaps, that Venezuela trusts, which, by the way, China and Russia have been able to deliver aid. That's why they keep trying to be specific about the United States. Now, here's what's cool about this. Remember, a day ago, I did a video addressing this very topic, discussing how the United States has always used aid as a precursor to infiltrate any regime that they would like. And they give weapons to rebels, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Those rebels then turn on the government has to defend itself, and then the government gets demonized as using its power to suppress people. It's Elliot Abrams one-on-one. And specifically, I actually discussed Elliot Abrams in that video. I said the moment that Trump brought on Elliot Abrams to help carry out this regime change in Venezuela, Bernie Sanders, or more specifically, his foreign policy advisor, Matt Duss, should have known immediately, okay, this humanitarian aid isn't on the up and up, because anyone who knows anything about foreign policy knows that this guy is dangerous. He's the one who coined the strategy of using humanitarian aid to overthrow countries in South America specifically. So clearly, I don't know if he watched my video, but he watched maybe a couple of videos and read some things before he stepped on that debate stage because he knew that question was coming. He made sure to specify international aid, that it did not need to come from the United States. He made sure to specify that if there is going to be a free and fair election, and if there is going to be a re-election, it needs to come from the international community. The monitoring needs to come from the international community, not the United States. Obviously, he goes on to say that we cannot initiate a regime change war. And the most beautiful part, in my opinion, about the whole thing, not calling Maduro a dictator was dope. I love that part. But when he said, from Venezuela to Saudi Arabia, it is not our job to control the outcome of people's elections. And what's one of my favorite lines, people? It's interesting that they care about the Venezuelas of the world, they care about the Syrias of the world, but they don't say anything about the Saudi Arabias of the world. When's the last time they held an election? All the human rights abuses that Saudi Arabia is going through as we speak. I mean, decades and decades and decades that we've overlooked. Why doesn't Trump actually fawns over Saudi Arabia? So why is that? Why is he pretending that it's about humanitarian aid? Oh, unless it's not about humanitarian aid. So I think that a combination of factors affected Bernie Sanders to the point where he decided, you know what? I don't know the whole story yet, because maybe it sounded like he just absorbed some of that information, because it was almost even unnatural for him to say, no, he's not a dictator. It was kind of weird because he didn't say it like with that powerful, boisterous, like this, just, how he can be a little loquacious sometimes when he's giving his answers. He wasn't that person. He was kind of more like, actually, nah, he's not a dictator, technically. You can tell it wasn't something that he was comfortable saying, which means that he's moving left. I'm pretty sure Tulsi Gabbard has something to do with that as well. But like I said, the truth of the matter is, this is a big deal. It's a bigger deal than what people think, because the only way, once again, that you can justify going in to conduct a regime change war, like we know the Trump administration wants to do, is by setting the narrative as such so that people believe that someone is consolidating power into one office and there is no mechanisms of democracy to keep that power in check. When you say that Maduro, even though you may not like him, is part of a democratic process, even if you say you want to see a re-election, that's fine, whatever. I think Maduro would agree with it, to be honest with you. From the internet, once again, being observed by the international community, not the United States, because the United States clearly has vested interests. So that's a step in the right direction. I'm a pragmatic person, people. I'm not hard to please. I can be sometimes, but what that showed me is something more important than always being right 100% of the time, because nobody's ever going to be right 100% of the time. It showed me that there is some entity out there that is informing Bernie on the issues, a little bit at a time, and Bernie is listening. And if he's willing to listen and willing to push back against narratives and call out countries like Saudi Arabia, which previously was a taboo thing for any nominee from any party to do, if he's willing to do those things, then I'll cut him a little slack if he doesn't get the answer 100% right. Because being willing to look in that camera, look Wolf Blitzer in the face and say, no, he's not a dictator. That took a lot of balls, and he took a lot of heat for that from CNN afterwards. So we'd love to know what your thoughts are about this. So like the video, share it, leave a comment below, and always remember, more than anything else, find your balance. Peace. Thanks for watching that segment of Mi Casa es Su Casa. You can donate to our Patreon and keep helping the network grow by clicking on the link in the description below. And also, make sure you join us at JustNForm.com. And finally, make sure you subscribe to us on Roku and be part of the very first independent news network on Roku TV. But more than anything else, always remember, find your balance. Peace.